And we're here in the Willamette Falls Media Center studios for our poetry reading tonight. Maggie Chula is with us, and I'm going to introduce her in just a minute. My lovely wife, Jane, is to my right, and we're very fortunate, we're very happy. We have a small studio audience with us. So thank you for being here. And they're going to participate in the question and answer that we're going to have at the end of Maggie's readings. So we are going to have a Q&A period. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat. And what we're going to try to do when we get there is we'll have questions from me, from Jane, from the studio audience. And we'll also take them as we can from the chat. Before I introduce Maggie, some thanks I want to say. Firstly, thanks to you for being here. We know you have a lot of choices, and we're very happy and delighted that you choose to spend the evening with us hearing poetry. We want to thank the city of Milwaukie because they have been supportive of us from the beginning. Thanks to the Letting Library. We're a committee of the Letting Library, and the library has also been very supportive. And finally, thanks to the Milwaukie Poetry Series Committee. We do have a committee that works on this. And as you know, and really you hear me say, that we don't have something happen unless you have people working on it. Finally, thanks to Willamette Falls Media and our technician, Josh Reynolds, who is here, and also a member of the Milwaukie Poetry Series Committee, Bev Spurgeon, who has been training on it and is doing some of the technical work. So if we don't have the technical work done, then the program doesn't come to you. So thanks to them. A couple of things I'll say about the Milwaukie Poetry Series. Firstly, we are getting a new website. So we're very excited about that. And sometime in the next couple of months, it's going to go operational. So you can watch for that. Secondly, coming events. Jennifer Perrine is going to be here in June. And we are starting our First Friday summer season. We have a First Friday summer season that we co-sponsor with St. John the Evangelist in Milwaukie. And that's, as it indicates, on the first Friday of the month. We had the first one in May. The next one's going to be June on the first Friday on Zoom at 6:30. Thank you for being with us tonight. We're a half hour earlier. And so we appreciate you being here. And now, I'm going to introduce our poet for the evening that we're delighted to have with us. And that's Maggie was a reader in the 4th season of the Milwaukie Poetry Series, also in May. And she was reading when we were at the Pond House. If many of you remember the Pond House with the geese and the ducks. So she's back for a second time. She has published over a dozen collections of poetry, including most recently, Firefight Lanterns, 12 Years in Kyoto. While living there, she practiced Soto Zen, studied the traditional arts of flower arrangement and woodblock painting, and composed haiku. All of Maggie's poems, including haiku, tanka, haibun, and free verse, explore the interconnectedness between our everyday lives and the natural world. A featured speaker and workshop leader at haiku conferences around the world, she has also served as president of the Tanka Society of America, poet laureate for the Friends of Chamber Music, and is on the advisory board for the Center for Japanese Studies at PSU. Maggie lives on the Portland skyline, where she hikes, swims, and creates flower arrangements for every room of the house. I read that, and I can almost smell the flowers in the house. It just sounds lovely. Would you join me in welcoming our poet for tonight, Maggie Chula? Maggie.
Mimaloose Hills, a Tonka series. What sweet innocence, blue-eyed Marys blooming along the trail. Those unblinking eyes of my childhood dolls. Queen of the spring, yellow balsam root. When they bloom, it's time for rattlesnakes to come out from their dens. 10 hikers all stop at once to take photos. 10 views of Mount Hood while standing in Poison Oak. From Marsh Hill, we look down on the island of the dead. Like wildflowers, the graves all facing east. Yellow swallowtails flit around clusters of lupin and larkspur. Tonight, all my dreams will be in color. So what I've just read is called a tanka series, tanka, T-A-N-K-A. Tanka is translated in from Japanese as short song. And indeed, they are songs. They're musical, lyrical, and they're full of images, which is what I love best. So in 5 lines, you can convey an experience and an emotion, without even mentioning the emotion, through a series of images. This form was used in Japanese courts about 1,300 years ago as a way of courtship. So men and women would send tanka back and forth to each other, and the suitor was judged on the skill of his poetry, the kind of paper he used, the sprig of the seasonal flower that he accompanied. So it was a very genteel time. There's nothing like it these days, I'm afraid. There's often in tanka a pivot line that moves, usually after the third line, it moves, say, from something in our own lives to something in nature. So look for those when you hear the tanka that I'm going to read next. This is Perigee Moon. And this was published, as I say, in the time of COVID, so this is the first time I've had a reading from it with a live audience. And this is separated into 5 sections. I'm going to read a couple of tanka from each section. The first one is the love section. Unlike Pygmalion's marble Galatia, my lover's lips are pliant and warm and taste of strawberries. After the divorce, Lady Shatterley's lover, hidden in her drawer, both mother and I enthralled by unrequited love. The next section has to do with my mother. Red Rover, she was always the last one to be called over. My faint-hearted mother, who outlived all her friends. The next section is keepsakes. Discovering my high school diary with a small key lock. My life preserved in shorthand. I can no longer read. These tanka really do date me, I realized. I mean, who does shorthand these days? And Red Rover, who plays that anymore? So it's kind of a documentation of a certain era. Cradled in my palm, my baby sister's ashes and shards of bones, remembering how I envied her cheekbones. This is my youngest sister who died about 3 years ago. Yellow jacket sting. I relieve the pain with frozen packets of organic blueberries and homemade margaritas. The last section is called Footloose and Fancy Free. In Sri Lanka, climbing the rocky trail to world's end, we chant to scare off the chuffing leopard. In Sri Lanka, climbing the rocky trail to world's end, we chant to scare off the chuffing leopard. This was in 1978, and what we sang was, "We are marching to Pretoria, Pretoria." And as we ascended and we got more and more frightened because there was really nowhere to go but up or down, and he was behind us, so the verses became more and more outrageous. We entertained ourselves. And the last one from this book, Muso Soseki was a Buddhist monk, a poet, and a garden designer. And this is his temple. At Saihoji Temple, sitting on Muso's meditation rock, the same green moss and raucous crows. Okay, another book that came out just before COVID, Daffodils at Twilight. And I'm going to begin with the title poem. These are free verse. Daffodils at Twilight. This is the pulse that makes your blood surge, makes you remember bouquets for your mother, held in small fists of wanting to please, of waiting to hear her say again, "You are the kindest of all my children. You are my number one daughter." And the gray of winter vanishes, disappears like your grief into ritual and reams of poems. Now you know better than to cut those blossoms, their scent a reminder of moon phases and seasons, and how their petals will turn to parchment like the withered arms of your mother. As the crickets sing their night song, you stand by the window, needing to hear those words, "You are my number one daughter." Still, this terrible hunger. My mother loved to say that because I'm the eldest of 3 daughters and 2 sons, so she'd say, "You're my number one," and everyone else felt, "Oh yeah, she's first," but I knew what she really meant. Cutouts. The only horses I liked were cookie cutouts. I loved the way that dough stuck to the sharp metallic edges after you lifted the mold. Nana flattened out the dough with her wooden rolling pin and sprinkled it with flour so the small horses had a mottled look, like Appaloosas who had pranced in a snowfield after dark, free of the weight of men and saddles and bad-tempered children. I don't know why Nana had horse cookie cutters. She never liked real horses with their neighing and unpredictable ways. My first pony ride was at summer camp. His nostrils snorted, flies buzzed around his tail. He stank of dust and dung. I bounced high off the saddle, my bony legs turned numb from gripping. The reins tore my skin. I cried with relief when I was allowed to dismount. The next time Nana made horse cookies, I bit off all 4 of their legs, one by one, with my small, sharp teeth. I was never one of these horse-loving girls, but my granddaughter made up for what I didn't like. She's crazy about horses. Song of Gratitude. Love the Kamo River. Its waters turn blue from rinsing the indigo dyes of kimonos. Love the hummingbirds. Love the koi who swim like kings, even though without their glitter, they'd be only mouth and tail. Love the katsura tree with its multiple trunks and heart-shaped leaves. Admire the anteater and its endurance, carrying its armor for a lifetime. Rejoice in the green of a kingfisher's wing or the deep purple skin of an eggplant. Delight in the color of dusk when sun breaks through the scum of clouds and a rabbit peers out of his hutch. Love your mother, who always wears her favorite dress when she comes to you in dreams, and give thanks to the lilac bush that blooms from her ashes. Love also the sounds of trucks without mufflers, the breath of drunkards returning home, and the chorus of spring peepers reminding you that you are not alone. Delight in waking from a deep sleep to hear the snoring of your husband beside you. Alive. Yes, still alive. Okay. I'm going to read, the next poem is also, it's a haibun, which I haven't talked about before. Haibun is a combination of haiku and prose. So you can start with a haiku, write a prose piece, and end with a haiku, or you can intersperse haiku. There are no rules how many you use. The haiku slows the prose down, slows the narrative down. In this particular one, the haiku comes at the very end, and there's a little shift. It's not, the ending to the narrative. This was written about experience I had in Herat in 1977 in Afghanistan. And John and I traveled overland through Asia for 3 years. And despite some hardships, Afghanistan was one of our favorite places, particularly Herat with its really unworldly light. Dust settles. Herat, 1977. I forgive the thief who broke into our room at the Bezod and stole our duffel bag. I forgive him because time has passed and I am still alive, and he most likely is not. We were inexperienced travelers then and had padlocked all our valuables in that bag: cameras, Nikon lenses, binoculars, and medications. Soon after the robbery, I came down with dysentery. I laid on my bunk covered with a torn blanket, rising only to drag myself to the filthy toilet down the hall. My temperature climbed to 104 degrees. I cursed the man who had stolen our antibiotics. For 3 days, I fasted and hallucinated and thought about where I would be buried. But on October 10th, my 30th birthday, the fever broke. Rising from my sick bed, I walked to the veranda and raised my hands to the sky. The sun was shining. The next day, we would head overland across the desert to Mazar-e Sharif. Muslim call to worship, the jingle of horse carts, dust settles. Muslim call to worship, the jingle of horse carts, dust settles. That was pretty amazing. And that at that time, nobody had ever heard of Mazar-e Sharif. We were there just before the Russians came, about 2 months before the Russians invaded. So it was a very magical time. The hardships were incredible. We got on the back of a pickup truck, and I had my little bowl to throw up in. And there was no road, so we ended up, it was full of Afghanis sitting on the back of a pickup truck. So we actually was really a lot of fun, except for the hardships. And we got to Mazar-e Sharif, and wow, it was civilized because there were roads. And here's another haibun, a different spirit. I don't know about, I think most of us actually have had precognitive dreams. the actuality may not be exactly what happened in our dreams, but I think they're dream spirits, and I think this is one I call dream catcher. Dream catcher. I'm at a friend's house. Her daughter climbs a ladder and takes down a birdhouse. A chickadee, a bluebird, and wren fly out. Then she opens the back exit and an owl emerges, blinking in the sun. He flutters slowly to the ground. I kneel down, and he allows me to pet him with both hands. His feathers are gray and soft like fur. Large yellow eyes hold my gaze as he tells me what I need to hear. When I awaken, I can't remember a word he said. Cleaning out my dead sister's closet, among hat boxes, shoes, and fur coats, mother's ceramic owl. Cleaning out my dead sister's closet, among hat boxes, shoes, and fur coats, mother's ceramic owl. Mother took up ceramics later in her life at the senior center, and she had birds all over the house, all kinds of ceramic birds, so one of them was an owl. And she made lamps out of them, the usual kitsch. But she really enjoyed it, and she gifted us at least one lamp each. So I'm going to read one more recent poem before I move on to my new book. Serenade. Actually, this was written in Word Sisters, the prompt group that I belong to, where we all take turns bringing a prompt and we write to it and read it and then comment on it. Serenade. Hidden in tall grasses, I listen to a beetle click its way towards something invisible, even to my young eyes, that could identify a robin in flight, but could not mimic its song with my voice, or even with my B-flat clarinet that trilled and gurgled up and down the scale until its keypads worn thin into a screech, like the backyard jay, like brakes on a deserted road, like Greek women keening the loss of husbands or sons or houses buried in rubble, like the shriek of children separated from parents by men in starched uniforms and handguns that squeak against their leather holsters. Inside cages, more low-pitched moans, blare of sirens, commands of border guards, and even above, from a cloudless sky, the jabbering crows have their say. I want to take out my clarinet from its velvet case, replace all the white pads, and play a serenade to the terrified children, to the empty-handed parents, to a chorus of frogs and crickets who can sing only laments. Okay, time for Firefly Lanterns. This was published this year, no, 2021, but toward the end of the year, so it's really brand new. This is a photograph by John Einerson, who is the editor and founder of Kyoto Journal, good friend, and he donated it for the cover. I'm going to begin by reading a little bit from the introduction so you can get a sense of what this book is about. In 1977, my husband and I embarked on what turned out to be a 2-year odyssey, traveling through Asia. We rode on buses, BMOs, rickshaws, and horses, taking in the sights and sounds and smells around us. Each country challenged us to learn a new language, culture, and monetary system. We traveled slowly, spending many weeks in each country and months in Greece, Afghanistan, India, Nepal, Borneo, and Bali. When we returned to the U.S. in 1979, we agreed that we wanted to live and work in a different culture for an extended period. We chose Japan. John had been practicing Aikido and was fascinated by Japanese arts. I was drawn to the subtleties of Japanese poetry and to a culture that celebrated the beauty of everyday life. So in 1980, unencumbered by children or jobs, we once again said goodbye to our friends and family and set out off to the land of Wa. Arriving in Kyoto during rainy season, we quickly found teaching jobs and a place to house sit for the summer. Once settled into our permanent home at Icho-dacho, we immersed ourselves in the joys and challenges of living in a traditional Japanese house. I studied ikebana, flower arrangement, and woodblock printing. We both found teaching positions at universities, and when it was time to renew our contracts, we would agree to stay another year. We ended up staying for 12 years. So I'm going to read the very beginning of when we first arrived in Kyoto. Plum rain, Tsuyu. John and I arrived in Kyoto in mid-June, the beginning of Tsuyu. The literal translation, plum rain, brings to mind green plums viewed through a canopy of verdant leaves. Very romantic for this unwelcome season between spring and summer. Even the Japanese, who accept most things with equanimity, begin to complain. Housewives fan themselves in a frenzy, intoning mushiatsui, mushiatsui, like a Buddhist sutra that would, if repeated often enough, bring relief from suffering. Mushiatsui, steamy, hot. During Tsuyu, everything sweats, even lifeless things like the bamboo railings in our traditional house. Leather shoes grow furry with mold, especially when left in a dark corner of the entryway. Futon absorb moisture until they compact into hard, damp pallets. Usually they can be aired outside, but not during Tsuyu with its constant drizzle. We have no clothes dryer. During breaks in the rain, we thread our laundry onto a bamboo pole, then hang the pole on wooden supports outside our second-story window. So we thread them through the window and put them on the posts. Insects thrive in the damp heat. Mosquitoes hatch along with pollywogs in the newly flooded rice fields. Then, right on schedule, school children with red or yellow caps parade like rows of brilliant tulips along the path. Out come the nets and jars. Plop they go, one by one, into the flooded fields to gather pollywogs and bring them back to the classroom. Watching from the kitchen window, I'm reminded of Basho's famous haiku, old pond, a frog jumps in, sound of water. And I write, rice paddy, pollywogs snatched in nets, squeals of children. I sit at my writing desk trying to stay cool in my cotton yukata robe. The pink-petaled peony releases its perfume into the still air. All at once, peony blossoms drop. Clap of thunder. All at once, peony blossoms drop. Clap of thunder. Mosquitoes, spiders, ants. We are plagued by insects that find their way into the leaks and crevices of our old Japanese house. They have discovered my flowered kimono, those relentless ants. They have discovered my flowered kimono, those relentless ants. Even worse is the dreaded mukade. The centipede sting can kill a baby. During Tsuyu, mukade migrate to dark, dry places. One day, while reaching into the closet for something, I felt a prick. When I pulled my hand back, I saw a 6-inch long centipede curled around my finger. Cicadas choose this season to emerge. After 9 years underground, they discard their exoskeletons, ghostly skins left clinging to the branches. Their song, a continuous buzz that resounds in the dull heat. Sawing afternoon into evening, cicadas. Sawing afternoon into evening, cicadas. So that was a bit difficult for a welcome to Kyoto, and we had no idea there was a 5th season called Tsuyu. Tsuyu starts, according to the Japanese, June 15th and ends July 15th in time for the big Gion Matsuri parade. So the rain stops magically on July 15th. Despite that, we learned how to live in our very basic Japanese house with all the insects and critters. We had a weasel once come into the back foyer, so we learned to live with these creatures and mice in the closet as well. Okay, I'm going to read the title poem, Firefly Lanterns. And Firefly Lanterns are translated as Hotaru Bukuro, Japanese. In early June, we got a telephone call from Murayama-san, our potter friend from Ayabe. "Maggie," he says, "the fireflies are out." "Okay," I say, "we'll be right up." Ayabe is a 2.5-hour drive from Kyoto along a rural highway that meanders through mountain villages. John and I pack an overnight bag and leave right after our university classes. Murayama-san, his wife Ayako, and 10-year-old daughter Tomoko greet us warmly outside their farmhouse. Though we are the best of friends, we call him by his surname, Murayama-san. So does his wife. Ayako prepares a simple meal of tofu, fish, vegetables from her garden. As soon as it gets dark, we gather nets and glass jars and head outside. It's a remarkably clear night for Tsuyu. Stars reflections, mirrored in the paddy field. Oh, the fireflies. They land on the grasses bordering the rice fields and on the Hotaru Bukuro, white bellflowers that thrive in the damp soil. Tomoko plucks a bellflower for me and explains that Hotaru means firefly and Bukuro is sack. With our butterfly nets, we scoop the air and capture a net full of fireflies. Carefully, we transfer them to the Hotaru Bukuro by opening the blossoms and inserting the fireflies into their petal-soft cage. Soon the flowers begin to take on the glow of the firefly's light. By the end of an hour, we have a handful of lanterns to guide our way home. Other fireflies are contained in jars. How many do we have? 50? 100? It's impossible to count them with their lights flickering on and off, on and off. At the farmhouse, we remove our shoes and gather in the main room, settling down on the tatami. Murayama-san goes outside to his kiln and selects some small cups from a recent firing. He presents each of us with a pristine cup, and he fills it with sake. "Kanpai," he toasts. "Kanpai," we echo, raising the smooth cups to our lips. Our host closes all the fusuma to the rest of the house. Then opening the lids to the glass jars, he releases the fireflies into the room. Tomoko and I peel back the petals of the Hotaru Bukuro and coax our captives from their silken cage. They dart and flash their green lights as they settle on arms and knees and on the Japanese scroll in the alcove. Lying on tatami in a room full of fireflies, the evening cool. Lying on tatami in a room full of fireflies, the evening cool. In the darkened room, we drink sake and talk softly, speak of gentle things, the importance of friendship, the natural abundance of life. For hours, we lie on the tatami whispering as night deepens and the sake bottle empties. On the ceiling, the stars flicker on and off, on and off. When it's finally time to retire, Murayama-san opens the shoji and releases the fireflies into the night. By morning, they will have scattered far and wide, specks of darkness against the overcast sky. Thank you. You know, poetry and words and prose just really put you right back in that moment, very special moments that we have. So it's wonderful to have them published so you can experience them again and again.
What a lovely image of all those fireflies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I miss fireflies from back east where I grew up. There aren't any out here, but I was thinking too. I miss them, yeah.
Right.
Thank you so much, Maggie. And time for rattlesnakes to come out of their dens. All my dreams will be in color. Homemade margaritas. Still this terrible hunger. Delight in the color of dusk. More low-pitched moans. They went on, like rows of brilliant tulips. Children marching like rows of brilliant tulips. So I've been in Japan, and that's an image that really resonates. Pink petaled peonies. So some wonderful, wonderful images. And I would like you, we're virtual, so I would like you to hear, if you would, thunderous applause. So we have applause here from our studio audience. And for all of those people that are watching, applause. Very deserved. So we're going to start the question and answer period. And hopefully you have a poem in reserve.
I do. A special poem.
Good. So we'll do the Q&A, and then we'll come back to Maggie, and we'll end the reading with her reading a poem. So we've got two questions here on the chat, and the first one is from Lex Runciman. And Lex says, can you talk about what working in Japanese forms has taught you about writing, and perhaps also about your own cultural orientations in the world?
Oh, big questions, Lex. Thank you.
Yeah. We have some other questions.
Yeah.
That's a big one, though.
Japanese forms. When I lived in Kyoto, I met Edith Schiffert, who was the American poet in Kyoto. She was very famous. And when I met her, we became the two American poets in Kyoto. Edith told me, don't write haiku. Wait till you're old to write haiku. Write longer forms of poetry while you can. Well, I didn't listen to her because I lived in Japan, and haiku just seemed very appropriate to observe all the seasons. And I've written haiku for over 40 years. I started writing tanka about 35 years ago, and then haibun as well. So those forms have helped me write longer free verse poems because they focus on image and leaving space. That space gives power to the emotion. So I'm glad I started with haiku, and I wrote free verse when I was young, but writing haiku has just really helped me focus, and tanka even more about emotional experiences. And the other part was culture
Well, your cultural orientations, your own cultural orientations of the world, and how has that impacted
Oh,
that?
yeah, so we've been through many cultures. Every time we went to a different country, we had to learn the money, the language. We learn language from children, by the way. If you travel to exotic countries and don't know the language, hang out with kids. They'll teach you how to count and feel really happy about it. So we had to learn all of these just to fit in. And, well, we never fit in, but just to get on. So John and I have both taken parts of all these cultures with us. We speak a mixed language of English, Indonesian, French, and Japanese. So, when we have our private language, and it's a conglomeration of all these different words we heard, and even some Afghani or Iranian. We can greet people in Iranian. So that's been really wonderful. Those have stayed with us, and of course the beauty of the cultures, the art, has really. It's wonderful to recall all our experiences in Iran, Shiraz, all these beautiful places. But really, I feel half Japanese. And it took us a long, long time to feel American again, and I never really did feel American. I felt really uncomfortable when I'd walk into a store, even in Portland, a very friendly town, and people would not greet me. The shopkeeper would not greet me with "Irashaimase," because that happened in Japan. You walk out and buy nothing, they say "Arigatou gozaimashita," thank you very much. So it's such a graceful culture, and that's what I miss a lot, and I try to maintain that in myself.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask you, who are you reading?
I've actually prepared because I knew you would ask that question.
We've got another great question here from the chat, too.
Okay. This is probably going to be a surprise, but Agatha Christie is right now in my living room. She has 66 novels, so it might take me a while to go through them. But I like her at this time because it's a gentler time. I like the pacing of her mystery. I like the atmosphere. I like the complexity of the characters. So I find it in her powers of observation, Miss Marple. I find it very soothing to read those. I'm also reading Ada Limon. These are some of my favorite poets. Naomi Shihab Nye, Jane Hirschfield, Ellen Bass. And I read several journals. Tonka Society of America Journal, Haiku Society of America Journal, and Canadian Tonka Journal, and there's a journal in Japan that comes to my house every few months. So journals take up a lot of time too.
Okay, thank you. Is there any question from the studio audience?
I always like to know how did you get started writing poetry? And what were your first themes?
My themes? Yeah. I started writing probably when I was a child. I would just make observations when I was playing out in the woods or out in the fields. And I would just note things down in a notebook. In high school, I joined the newspaper club. And I wrote poems that rhymed, like most of us did back then in the dark ages. And in college, I wrote angry poems. I was shedding my religion and being brought up Roman Catholic. And so I wrote angry poems about God and religion and I can't remember what. I don't have any of those poems. I wish I had, but I'm sure many of them rhymed. And I wrote poems when we were traveling. I kept a journal and I wrote poems, which I haven't really gone back to look at, but I'm sure there's something in there that I could use now. And really, I write poems now because I'm in 2 poetry groups. One is a prompt group, and we have a critique group once a month. And so the prompt group gives me an opportunity to write a poem, and then the critique group gives me a chance to show it to others and get some feedback. So that's what keeps me going.
It
with
does
writing.
encourage writing, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yes. Was there another question from
Yeah.
the
When
audience?
you have an idea for a poem, how do you decide if it's going to be free verse or a tanka series or haibun, or how do you work that out?
Oh, yeah, good question. It used to be haiku because I was really in the haiku way of seeing things. Now, if there's an emotional component to my experience, I'll write tanka. If there's a whole story that really can't be told in 5 lines, then I'll write lyrical verse. Haibun also is a very good form for writing stories, but really just one incident, it has to be very focused still, like the haiku and tanka. Now I'm writing very little haiku because I'll be walking out in the woods and I'll see something and I'll say, oh, and I'll write a haiku in my mind. I'll say, I've already said that. And it wasn't as good as what I've already said. So I think I've outlived my haiku days. I will write one occasionally for a contest, and if it places, I get very encouraged to keep going. But and I still write tanka quite a bit, but haibun and free verse right now. I think part of the stage I'm in is I'm looking back, as many of us are at this age, at my life, and those experiences need a full-length poem to express.
Well, thank you. Here's a related question in the chat, and this is from Andrea Hollander. Could you please talk about the shift you make between Japanese forms and Western ones, like free verse? Did you begin with haiku and later write away from them? Please tell us.
Begin with haiku and write away in order to make a free verse?
Yes. The
Oh,
shift you
no.
make between Japanese form and Western ones. Did you begin with the haiku and later write away from them?
Oh, I see. When I'm writing a free verse poem, do I begin with haiku?
Yeah.
Oh,
Or the other way
absolutely not. No, they're very compartmentalized in my mind and in my spirit and the way I look at things. Sometimes if I'm writing a haibun, yeah, I'll start with a haiku, and then I'll write some prose, and then maybe end with a haiku. But all the poems in Daffodils at Twilight, for example, were very far removed from haiku. I think haiku just helped me present images and leave space in my poems for people to fill in with their own experiences.
So the poems that had both forms, did you write the free verse form first and then the haiku?
Oh, for the haibun with the prose and haiku?
Yeah.
Sometimes I start with a haiku. Sometimes I start with prose.
Okay.
Sometimes I have 5 or 6 haiku interspersed. Sometimes I have prose and then haiku at the end. So it's very free form.
Okay.
It's whatever hits me first. Sometimes when I teach haibun, I start with a haiku by somebody else. And I have as a springboard, people write off of that.
Okay.
Oh, wait, it's Carolyn. Okay.
Okay. And then Carolyn. There's Carolyn in the
We've got
back.
an eager audience here.
Fighting to get your attention. I thought Firefly Lanterns was stunning in the fact that I was right there with you. It amazed me how you could use details about the insects, meals you had, temples you visited, rituals that you went through. How did you remember all this?
My mother asked the same question. She said, how do you remember all these childhood things? I don't know. Maybe I start with the emotion first, and then I plug back into the incident. Some of these in Firefly Lanterns are historic, my interpretation of history. the tea master Riku's last tea ceremony before he killed himself. I knew the story, but I did a lot of research as well. I'd also experienced tea ceremony. I'd been to the place where he committed suicide. So I used my own personal experience and combined it with historical information that I tried to interweave. I did keep some diaries, actually, so I did refer to the poems in Firefly Lanterns. I referred to diaries occasionally. I referred to my husband's memory, which is usually different from my memory, but it comes in use. Thank you for the compliment, though.
Here's a clarification of the question from Andrea. Her question is that she wants to know about your Western work only after having lived and written in Japan.
So, my Western work, how is it different if I hadn't lived in Japan, I guess? I find that hard to answer.
It sounds like it means, did you move from focusing on haiku and Asian forms? And then when you moved back here, did you gradually move into free verse? I think that's maybe where she's going. And was that a
Yes.
transition for you?
Okay, thank you. I wrote a lot of haiku when I first came back here. My first 3 or 4 books were haiku. And then I think it's the poetry groups that I'm so blessed to be in that moved me toward writing more free verse. I mean, I tried to throw a haibun in or something else in and nobody understood it. So I thought, well, I'm not using this critique group to the fullest. I'll just write some free verse. And because I had a lot of stories of my past to write, I wanted to move into longer forms.
Great, thank you.
Hand up now?
Yeah, yes.
So when you were reading the haibun about Hirat, you said to us that there was a little shift to the haiku that followed it. And little shift seems to me something that happens quite a lot in your poetry, which I find admirable. There was one about the Zen garden where there's this green moss, and then all of a sudden there's raucous crows. Or in the very moving poem about holding your baby sister's ashes, the bones and ashes in your hand, and the next line, you're having admired her cheekbones. And I'm just wondering if that's something you keep in mind, particularly when you're writing, or if those are wonderful, fortunate things that happen as you go.
Once again, writing tanka and haiku have helped me make those shifts in poetry. As we all know, the shifts are really important, and particularly toward the end, as you go on along on a certain narrative and then you just kind of shift, and we all can tell where that is in a poem, and it's exciting. And yeah, so it has helped me, using the, writing the Japanese forms has helped me so much in my free verse lyrical poetry.
I have to know. You mentioned about the centipede, right? That bit you, stung you?
It just wrapped itself around my finger.
Oh, it
Didn't, well, a little sting, but nothing much.
but, so you didn't have any kind of reaction?
No.
So you didn't die and you're here today.
Well, I see what you did.
I think I did shriek, but yeah.
And then have you been back to Japan, and if so, what's like the thing that has changed the most since when you lived there?
Yeah, we went back, we returned, and actually there's a section in this called "The Pond is Still There, but Smaller." We returned in several times, but the last time was 2014. The biggest difference is that when we get off the airplane, we don't have a home to go to. I mean, that's just the obvious difference. We're used to traveling and then just going to our home and seeing our friends, and our home is no longer there. Another big difference is that people are more accustomed to Westerners. They feel more comfortable. We used to be pointed at on the street, especially me with my blonde hair. And I'd be walking in the subway station, and it would just be full of black hair everywhere, and then this blonde, tall blonde soaring over everybody. So that's the difference. They're more comfortable, more people speak English. yeah, we're not so exotic anymore. Yeah. I mean, John was sitting on a subway once and a Japanese young child was crying and the mother tried to calm him down and John just scared him, made a face or some gesture, and the kid stopped crying. And the mother said, "Thank you."
Well, I've got one final question, and then we'll hear a poem from you to conclude the reading. I was wondering about what happened at the leopard story.
Oh, what happened?
Yes, what happened in,
think
how
he
did that
got-
turn out in one of your early poems?
I think he got tired of our singing.
Okay,
We got to the top, and we were the only ones there. It's a famous place, World's End. And we got to the top, and we waited, and we didn't hear the leopard, and we came down, and he was gone. So, yeah.
good.
We survived a lot of events like that in our travels.
Yes,
That's another book.
good. So you have a final poem for us.
I do. Before I read that, though, I do want to say thank you to my live audience. Thank you for coming, dear friends. And the city of Milwaukie for sponsoring this, the Letting Library. I really miss the Pond House, but it's wonderful just being here as well. The Poetry Series Committee and the Willamette Falls Media Center and Josh, thank you. And most of all, for Tom Hogan, who is the energy behind all of this. Thank you very much. And this next poem is actually, if I can find it, for both of you who, Tom and Jane, are going to the Grand Canyon soon. Right?
We had to postpone our plans a little bit.
Okay,
But
well,
please
maybe
read the
this will
poem. Please,
inspire you.
we are going.
Good.
We just had to delay a little bit.
Okay. On the rim. Late June, 100 degrees on the south rim of the Grand Canyon. 100 shades of rock carved out by erosion. My sister-in-law sits next to me. Every question is a minefield. How's your garden? Not keeping it up as her parents did. What's new in South Hadley? I'd rather not talk about my life. And so we sit in silence. I probably would not have seen it if we'd been chatting, or looking out at rock formations and tiny mules carrying tourists down to the Colorado. Who looks up when visiting the Grand Canyon? But I did. Just above us, soaring like a pterodactyl, a huge black raptor. I know right away it's a California condor, not a vulture with its jagged wings. No, these wings have translucent windows that let in the light. With only 200 condors in the world, what are the chances? Tang of sage, warm sun on my face, hum of crickets beneath the rocks. I leave the hard bench where Mary's sitting, straight-backed and glum, raise my hands and lift into sky. The condor sees me coming. With a single flap of its enormous wings, it eases its glide. This bird, powerful enough to carry me away.
Thank you so much, and thank you for reading that poem as the final poem. I know that for us, the Grand Canyon is a place that was better than expected. We thought it would be good, but it was better than that. So thank you very much for that. Thank you for the reading. Thank you to the studio audience for you to be here.
Our pleasure.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. And we've thanked Willamette Falls Media as well, Josh and Bev, up in the control room. I mentioned that Jennifer Perrine is going to be here in June, so we hope you will join us then. Thanks to our poet tonight, Maggie Chula, for being here with us. It was a wonderful event. Thank you.
Thank you.
For the Milwaukie Poetry Series, I'm Tom Hogan, and good night.